Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I recently moved into a quaint suburban neighborhood that I was thrilled to call home. My new neighbors seemed lovely and the community was tight-knit. But something bothered me. There were very few parking spots in our cul-de-sac and people often parked in front of other homes. I had no issue with this as long as it wasn't in my driveway. One day, I noticed that my neighbor had parked their car in my driveway. I didn't mind it too much as it was just one time. However, over the next few weeks, I noticed that they kept parking their car in my driveway, taking advantage of my kindness. I was frustrated, but I didn't want to cause any conflicts. I tried to address the issue by leaving a note on their car, but it didn't work. I even had a face-to-face conversation with them and they apologized, but the problem persisted. I was fed up with the situation and I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. One day, I came home from work and their car was parked in my driveway again. I was beyond furious and I decided to call a towing company to remove their car from my driveway. I made sure to show the tow truck driver that the car was not mine and they towed it away. The next day, my neighbor came over to my house screaming and shouting at me. They told me how much it cost them to get their car back from the towing company and they demanded that I pay for it. I refused and I told them that they had no right to park in my driveway without my permission. They stormed off, and I didn't hear from them for a while. A few weeks later, I received a letter from a lawyer threatening to sue me for damages caused by the towing. I was terrified and I didn't know what to do. I hired my own lawyer, and we prepared to go to court. On the day of the trial, I was nervous, but I knew that I had done the right thing. To my surprise, my neighbor didn't show up in court. The judge ruled in my favor, and I felt relieved. However, the situation wasn't over yet. A few days after the trial, my neighbor's house caught on fire. I was devastated and I rushed to their house to see if they were okay. Thankfully, they were safe, but their house was severely damaged. I felt sorry for them, and I decided to reach out to them and offer my help. To my surprise, they accepted my offer, and we started to rebuild our relationship. It was a slow process, but we eventually became good friends. I learned that sometimes taking drastic measures isn't always the best option, and that it's important to try to find a solution that works for everyone. Update recently, my neighbor and I organized a community event to raise money for the local fire department. We worked together to create a successful fundraiser, and we were proud of what we accomplished. We may have had our differences in the past, but we learned to put them aside and work together for a good cause. The next one is a pro-revenge story. In September of 2020, the apartment next to mine was let out to two young women, both students. After they settled in a bit, it turned out they wanted to have a party. No big deal, except Belgium was in full lockdown at this point due to COVID, and you were supposed to only have one fixed visitor over. But then again to be young again, etc. So I didn't really care. During this time, I was working in healthcare. I work with the mentally disabled, but I volunteered for the ad hoc COVID team, meaning I got called upon to tend to those residents who were sick and needed quarantining or were effectively diagnosed with COVID. This meant pretty long working hours, and I spent about 10 to 11 hours a day at work, with a full hour bike ride to and from work. Needless to say, I was pretty tired pretty much all the time, so I wasn't looking forward to the noise from a party, but I'm pretty chill and know that living in the city, some noise is to be expected. So they were having their party and I can stand some noise and music. But this party was ducking wild. People shouting full on in the hallway, wrecking things, etc. At about 4 in the morning, I introduced myself to the neighbors and asked them when they could expect their company, plus 20 people, to leave. And if they could refrain from having a party the next day as I have to work and get up at 6 every day. So they promised they would keep it down the rest of the night. They didn't, and that they wouldn't have a party the next day. Plot twist, they did have another party, and then did another one the day after. At this point I had been going a full 3 nights without sleep and was nearing neurosis. Every night I had talked to the girls, and every night they would be full of apologies and stuff, but nothing would change. I also felt terrible when I had to enter their place because it would be absolutely packed with people, and I work with some very vulnerable people at work whom I wouldn't want to spread COVID to. This was pre-tests, pre-vaccines, pretty much of the knowledge we now have about COVID. Luckily the weekend came, and they went to their parents and I could recover a bit. Suffice to say I wasn't really liking my new neighbors. During the next few weeks they refrained from big parties, but they would have a constant flood of people coming over during the night, and by constant I mean constant like their bell would ring 70 times a night, and people would always be coming or going, and those people would be drunk and loud. Our communal hallway is pretty much an echo chamber because it's all stone, and any noise will travel throughout the building. Basically, I couldn't rely on sleep at night. It drove me crazy. I could only sleep Friday through Sunday because then they would go off to their parents or whatever. I couldn't grasp how they could know this many people that would always be coming and going. During one night, while knocking on their door to complain about the noise, I encountered my upstairs neighbor, who was also on Reddit, hi, and decided that we would have to join forces to get this to stop. My neighbor told me some important bit of information. The reason there were people coming and going all the time was that they used their apartment as a makeshift bar/hangout. During this time, bars were closed due to COVID, and all those students were using the big apartment to hang out. Moreover, across the street was another frat house with 5 boys living there, and that too was a secret hangout. So people would hang out at those 2 places and cross the street if they wanted a different atmosphere, or wanted to see their other friends, etc. And the boys from across the street would also come over 15 times a night. Most visitors seemed to be law students who were affiliated with them. Basically, our communal hallway was just a part of their cafe space now. So we tried talking to the girls. Then we started to talk to the visitors. None of them had any sympathy for us when we were asking them to be quiet at 4 in the morning. Most of them just laughed at us, as we were the pesky neighbors, no doubt. Even more of them were just so wasted that they didn't know what they were doing. So we started calling the police, dozens of times. Most of the time they weren't let in, and police told us they couldn't do anything. We kept calling as we wanted a record of our calls in the system. Belgium was still in full lockdown at this point, and what they were doing was full-on illegal. Even so, police told us their hands were tied if they wouldn't open the door. When the police couldn't help, I turned to the next best thing. I'm a social worker, and so I have no problems looking up information and calling around to look for help. This is what I did. Most places, student unions, police, town hall, were understanding but couldn't really do much. So I acted on the suggestion of the upstairs neighbor and contacted one of the girls' deans. I shot him a nice email about sorry to have bothered him and taking up his time, but I had this big group of students from his faculty ganging up every night, and maybe he wanted to know about it since they were breaking every possible COVID rule that existed at that time. Especially since me and my neighbor were about to go to the papers with this story, as secret lockdown parties were becoming a thing in the papers at this point. This dean called me back right away, and we had a nice talk about our problems. He told me he was on it. So basically what he did was call the law student girl and her parents. Big drama ensued, and we finally got to sit down with the girls, and they finally sounded like they were sorry. Tears were shed, for which I had no patience, to be honest. We learned that the police had actually been inside a few times, and they were issued tickets for having secret parties. Those were €300 each a pop, so no idea why they didn't just stop. We learned they were not happy because the dean had called them up at 11 o'clock, and they were still asleep. To which I said, well, there is your problem. You were still asleep at 11 o'clock. I'm up at 6 every day, and you girls haven't been a bit understanding about that. So we got to feel a bit like we got our revenge, and we got to vent. But we kept it kind of nice and parted in good terms, hoping that this would be it, and we could live together as nice neighbors. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be here, right? You'd think they would have gotten the point now, and would refrain from making noise and partying. Well, you'd be wrong. Basically, what they did was they moved to the frat house across the street and started partying there. There were slightly fewer people running to and fro, but the noise was still a problem, and we were now in the middle of the second COVID wave. And these people were meeting up with big groups like crazy. Well, I hadn't seen a soul in almost a year. Never mind the people at my work who were forbidden from even going to their own freaking family. The whole thing was just ridiculous. My upstairs neighbor happened to film such a party across the street and had sent the clip to me. We were thinking about going to the press with our story, but weren't really sure if it would be a good idea. So I posted the clip of the party on the subreddit of our country to test the waters. It got quite some comments and upvotes, and it seemed most people were also sick of people disregarding the rules and having secret parties. After some talks with the upstairs neighbor, we decided to contact the press and simultaneously go up a step in the university hierarchy and contact the vice rector that had the power to start up a disciplinary case against the students. This person is one of 12 vice rectors for a total campus of about 15,000 students, so quite high up. Things move fast. Local news actually picked up our story from Reddit and contacted me, and we gave some background info. They confirmed with the police that cops had been dozens of times to our address and across the street and weren't let in most of the time. We mentioned that the university was involved and that we hoped they would finally intervene. The next day, the piece was on their website. It went viral there and got promoted to the sites of most national newspapers. Its headline was sensational enough, mentioning the dozens of times police had showed up, and also mentioning how healthcare workers were being kept up by selfish students. At the same time, the vice rector contacted us to take our statements, which we already had prepared up on paper, and informed us they would investigate and could possibly start up disciplinary actions. At the same time, more reporters were contacting me throughout the day, and we made sure to mention that to her and link the university to the printed articles. The next day, while at work, I got a message from the upstairs neighbor that a film crew from the national news was at our doorstep. He declined to talk to them, and I would have done the same, since this was getting pretty big now, but they made a segment anyway. And sure enough, that night at 7, here was my street, and a short section about cops standing in front of a closed door a dozen times, and the local press cop talking about the troubles of closed doors. The best part about it was that a student from the offending frat house across the street had let the film crew in and said on camera exactly what we were accusing them of towards the university, that they had been having parties and didn't let the cops in, and that they had done it multiple times. No idea what made him think that was a good idea. Anyway, trying not to make a huge story even longer, the press died down sometime later, thank God, and the disciplinary action from the uni went through. Before the hearing, we sat down with the girls from our block and cleared some things up. We wanted to live like normal people together, and we tried to make some amends. Because we put in a kind of good word for them, they got the lighter end of the stick, 40 hours of community service and some probation. The guys across the street got 80 hours each, and each had to write us a letter of apology, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading every time I got one. The sad part is, most of them sounded just like dumb young kids. But that was after getting called out on the news and being part of a disciplinary action. But we never wanted to escalate things this far. Some noise is to be expected when living in the same building, and we were never going to go to these extremes for some expected noises. But these people went to the extremes, and so we were forced to do the same. The rest of the year, a simple message on WhatsApp was enough to silence any noises we had coming from their apartment. If anything, I hope they learn that even very polite and chilled people can become very upset when presented with sleep deprivation and excessive noise. It was a tough lesson to learn, but hopefully, they learned it well. The next one is a petty revenge story. My ex-husband and I bought our home from his parents, who had it built in the 1950s. 4 years, my father-in-law wanted to install a shut-off valve in the utility room to shut off the water to the whole house for repairs. However, the plumber told him that it would cost a lot of money because they could not find the shutoff valve from the city water main at the street, commonly known as the Buffalo Box. Since the Buffalo Box was missing, they would have to freeze the pipes to stop the water before installing the shutoff valve, which was an expensive process, so it was never done. When we bought the house, we decided to get the shutoff valve installed. We called the water department, and they sent 2 workers to shut off the water. When they arrived, I explained the problem. They went out to the front yard, walked around a bit, and told me there was nothing they could do for me. According to the workers, it was my problem that they could not find the Buffalo Box, and I should call a plumber to dig up my front yard, sidewalk, and city easement to find my Buffalo Box. However, I have a background in residential real estate construction and am familiar with how water mains and Buffalo Boxes are installed. I told them that it was the city's issue as they were responsible for the Buffalo Box, not the homeowners. Despite my explanation, these guys were incredibly rude about it and left. They thought they could get away with being rude to an ignorant woman like me, but little did they know. Fast forward to a year later, I received a call from the city manager asking why I hadn't paid my water bill for over a year. I explained that I wanted to pay my water bill, but I wanted them to turn off my water first. He was a bit taken aback that I wanted them to turn off the water. So, I explained what the city workers told me about locating the Buffalo Box and their attitude about women not understanding those types of things. I also told him that if the city could not turn off my water, I would be happy to have free water forever because I would never pay another bill. We had a nice long chat about the situation, and he said that he would resolve my concerns. The next day, the same two guys showed up at my house with some digging equipment and spent the whole day digging up the easement and the sidewalk. Their attitudes were rather somber because the city manager had given them a talking to about mishandling the situation. They even apologized. They found the Buffalo box under the city-owned sidewalk. They fixed the Buffalo box to make it accessible and returned the next day to fix the sidewalk. They asked if I wanted the water turned off, but I declined, saying that I would have my plumber take care of it when we had him install the interior shutoff valve. And then I paid the water bill. The next one is an entitled people story. My sister sunk to a new low of manipulation with this one. A couple of months ago, she suddenly showed up at our parents' house with a boyfriend in tow and a positive pregnancy test, saying she was 2 months along. She claimed she wanted to make amends so her child would be able to know their grandparents. I saw this for what it was from the start. My sister went out of her way to get pregnant so dad would put her back in the will, and mom would make her the golden girl again. But things didn't go down that way at all. It was February when my sister showed up all of a sudden. She'd taken a leave from work to come see us. She even tried to act all smiles around me, but I could still see the hate in her eyes. She still blamed me. She never stopped blaming me, but she pretended that she'd seen the error of her ways. Mom seemed to buy her act, but Dad didn't at all. Though my parents having a grandchild is something they've been longing for, so they begrudgingly accepted my sister back for the moment, but not without making sure whether or not this was a con. Spoiler alert, it was. Dad suggested my sister take another pregnancy test to confirm. We expected her to protest, but she took the one Dad got and willingly used it, and it was positive. So she was indeed pregnant. My parents asked for some time alone with my sister, so I went home and didn't see them again until the next day's evening. I got the details on what happened from my parents then. The evening before, they'd had a long talk with my sister about all the things she'd done and told her that they would help support their grandchild and set up a college fund for them. But if my sister wanted a place back in the family, then she was going to have to work hard for it and prove she changed. Because it was obvious with the timing of the pregnancy that she only got pregnant just to try and get back in the family's good graces. She denied this, of course, but her past actions spoke for themselves. Our parents wanted her to seek therapy, both individual and group, with them over video calls. And they also wanted her to apologize to me for what she did years ago since she always refused to. That's when she finally broke and said that I don't deserve an apology because I'm the reason she got her life ruined to begin with. Well, Dad didn't let that slide and practically roared at her. And then he told her that she was never grateful for anything they did for her, and that she was only blaming me so she wouldn't have to take fault for her own actions. Mom chimed in and said that she had to realize her own past actions were beyond wrong. Like when she tried to force me to take the blame for her back, then so her baby wouldn't get in trouble. And how she'd said those horrible things to me when I refused. And if she could genuinely admit her wrongs, my sister could too. Well, my sister flipped out and left with her boyfriend. The few times I met the guy, I could tell he was only with my sister for the money, because she treated him like absolute crap. She even elbowed him in the stomach once, right in front of me. Anyway, my sister came back the next day with a long, rehearsed apology for them, crocodile tears included. And again, the only reason our parents let her back in was because of her pregnancy. She was set up back in her old room and spent the next few days trying to act all smiles. But her act was pretty bad. She was still expected to give me that long, overdue apology. And I met up with her and her boyfriend at a local restaurant our parents picked. We figured if she was to give me anything even remotely genuine as an apology, it couldn't be around our parents. She started off the apology by basically murmuring. And when her boyfriend wanted her to speak up, that's when she elbowed him in the stomach. And hard too. He asked to be excused and left us one-on-one. As soon as he was gone, my sister started what was more of a non-apology, basically saying she was sorry for what happened with trying to frame me, but that it still would have never happened if I'd just gone with it that day and gotten the alcohol for her party, and then we could have both had a great time. I countered that she still didn't get it. She framed me, and when cops were called on her, it had nothing to do with me. So if I had helped that day, then I would have been arrested and charged too. I got up and said she still hadn't changed. She only lives in her little self-important world and walked out. When our parents learned of this, my sister tried to deny the words she'd spoken to me. But my dad knows the owner of that restaurant. We were seated away from other noisy guests and were put right below a CCTV camera with audio. It caught everything. And my parents had the video within hours from the restaurant owner. They played it in front of my sister and told her this is exactly why she's not getting much in the will. Her child might be, but not her. That's when she threw a tantrum and walked out screaming at them. And this time she didn't come back. She got in her car and drove all the way back to LA without another word to any of us. She later called to say her boyfriend had left her, and she didn't know where he was, as I thought he was clearly in it for the money. And when their con failed, he cut her loose. So now my sister is around 4 months pregnant with her baby daddy pulling a runner. She's still sending our parents updates on the pregnancy. And my parents are having a very hard time dealing with the fact that their future grandchild is basically being used as an attempted bargaining chip for my sister to worm her way back in. And sis, if you see this post, I did warn you that I'd do this if you tried anything else. You've left our mother heartbroken all over again, our father beyond disappointed, and me as your mental scapegoat because you still can't admit it was 100% your fault you were disowned. You haven't changed a bit, and I doubt you ever